Hi everybody, my name is Rachel Bergeron and I am MYAVANA's Chief Hair Analyst and Educator. Welcome to our Intelligence Labs. And here we're going to study hair science. We know a lot of you all love to take care of your hair, but we want you to know a little bit more about the science behind it so that you'll be even better equipped to do so. So come on with me to the modules. And we're just using this to help teach you all about the hair science, as I said. So going forward, we're going to first start with the hair structure. So hair shaft. Do you guys even know what that is? I might not have known that a while back because we all think it's just hair, but hair is actually pretty complex. We have a lot of it on our bodies. Most of us are thinking just the hair on our heads, but the hair all across your body, from your legs, your arms, your underarms, other places in between, it all has the same structure. But on top of our heads, what we're thinking about the most. So we can focus on there for now. But we have three parts of the hair shaft. We have the cuticle, we have the cortex, and we have the medulla. Some people out there, if your hair is a little fine or it doesn't have a lot of melanin in it, you might not have the medulla. And so typically we'll see that more often in darker hair or coarser hair textures. So for the cuticle, that's the outermost layer. Think of it as like the shingles on the roof. And it's basically there to protect your hair, and it's a bunch of individual pieces, and they can either be more raised or they can be more closed. You want them to typically be in the middle, not too closed, low porosity, where your water and moisture are not able to get in, but you also don't want them too open, high porosity, where the water is just coming in and out or the moisture is coming in and out and you're not able to retain anything. We want them right in the middle so you have a good balance of moisture entering and remaining in your hair shaft. And after that, we have the cortex, which is the middle layer. This is where we mostly have the melanin, the keratin, really responsible for that hair structure. But again, you want your cuticle layer to protect all of that. And beneath that, we have the medulla, which is going to be a little bit softer. And it's also going to have not really much of a function that we have understood yet. But again, those with fine or lighter colored hair won't really have that part. And then moving on, next, okay, here's just a visual for you all. If you can look here, we have again the cuticle on the outside, and that can have several different layers to it. The cortex made up of mainly the proteins, and then we have the medulla for some of our hair strands. And then moving on again for the hair follicle. So you have the hair shaft, that's what you actually see beyond the scalp or beyond the skin on the other parts of the body. But for underneath, what's going on there? So we have three different parts we want to highlight. We have the bulb, the dermal papilla, and the sebaceous glands. So for sebaceous glands, might sound a little bit like sebum. If you're familiar with that, most of us know that from skincare because that's where it is. And the sebum is typically the oil that we naturally produce. You don't want too much, but you don't want none at all. So of course you might think of it as like, oh, sebum, oily skin. Might have used those little pieces of paper that we all did in middle school, put them on our face and see it just completely oiled out. And with our hair, it's important. If you have oily hair, you typically have more sebum, or for even people like me, I have a tightly textured hair, so my sebum's not really able to go anywhere. There's all those coils. It's just like too much of a roller coaster for it to travel down to the end. So that's typically why those with curly and coily types of hairs, they typically might struggle with moisture or just having that balance all the way to the end, whereas our straight-haired friends might have complaints that their hair is too oily because the oil is just sliding all the way down their hair shaft. So that kind of affects typically how often we're washing our hair or how we maintain our hair because of those things. And aside from that, we have the dermal papilla, which that's responsible for the actual blood that's coming into your hair. So this piece is very important because it's connected with our veins and our arteries. So essentially blood's coming in and out from there. So this is why if you want your hair to grow, it's important to have the good blood flow because that's where we're actually supplying the proteins and nutrients that are necessary to be the building blocks for our hair. So for good hair growth, you want good blood flow and you want to make sure you have the right nutrients. So what does that look like? In your diet, that's very important and critical here. You want to make sure we're having all of those key amino acids because our hair, we as humans, just to give this like really broadly, there are 20 amino acids and we can't produce all of them. So some are very essential to us that we have to get from our foods because we can't make them ourselves. If you're not getting those in your diet, then you can't make them and then your hair will suffer. So it might be a little bit more broken down, might not be as full or as strong as you want it. So those are some key things there. And your dermal papilla is also important because it's going to be supplying those nutrients. So that's important as well. And lastly, we have the bulb, where the papilla and the matrix cells are all within that, and it's going to essentially do the building. So it's taking those nutrients supplied and it's building it using those cells there. Okay, again, just to review the imagery behind what I was saying, we have the anatomy. So here we have the blue, we have the vein, and we have the red artery. So this is where the blood is actually coming in and out of your hair papilla, and that is what's supplying those nutrients. And so the papilla can then fuel the bulb, which will then actually come in and build and put all those amino acids and proteins together to form your hair follicle or your actual hair shaft. And it'll travel up through your scalp and come out and be beautiful and big. And also the sebaceous gland right there will then supply the oils needed for moisture. And we also have this muscle here, this erector pili muscle, that will help to actually fuel and push this process. Okay, now we're going to cover the growth phases of your hair cycle. So I get a lot of clients who, they want their hair analyzed, but they're like, I'm shedding so much hair or I have so much density loss. So I know that the growth cycles would be a really valuable piece of information for you all to learn a little bit about. So we have 3 stages in the hair growth cycle primarily. We have the anagen phase, the catagen phase, and the telogen phase. For the anagen phase, this is the active growth phase, and most of us are in this for about 2 to 7 years. And this is when our hair is actually growing. And for most people on average, of course, genetics and other factors can play a role, but we're growing about 1 centimeter of hair per month. And this is pretty good, but again, genetics might be the main winner here, or also just how you're taking care of your hair will kind of affect how much it'll grow during this phase. But also we have the catagen phase. So this is when it's starting to transition and your hair growth will stop, but it only lasts about 2 to 3 weeks. So don't worry, but your hair growth will stop and the follicle will shrink a little bit and your hair is going to start to move to make room for some new hair. And then we have the telogen phase. This is also known as the resting phase. And this lasts about 3 to 4 months, varying in different people. And the hair will actually fall out and your new hair will start to grow within the bottom of that follicle. So this can affect people in the sense that if your anagen phase is having error, then your hair might not actually be growing. So you might be seeing a little bit of density loss. Whereas with your telogen phase having error, you're going to be seeing more shedding because a lot of hair is falling out. And so those are the 2 phases that you'll see the errors that might affect you all in the everyday market. And I guess here's a visual of that. So again, anagen phase, we have the hair growing beautifully, erect up position, and the catagen phase is finishing out and it's pretty much mellowed out. In the telogen phase, it's going to make room for the new hair to come in place. This picture could almost do a little better if you see the actual follicle kind of lifted up here. It's a little sensitive. I'm gonna start over. Okay. Here's a visual of the phases. So we have the anagen phase here where the strand is lifted up and it's growing long. The catagen phase where it's pretty much dormant. And we have the telogen phase where it's making room for the new hair growth to begin. And then we have the early anagen, which is kind of like the continuation or transition back to anagen. This picture could be a little bit better because we could see this hair follicle kind of moved up here, ready to actually leave the scalp, and the new follicle growing at the bottom. That would better represent that a little bit more visually. And moving on. Now, for hair types and textures, I've realized in working with different groups of people, particularly women, that they don't know the difference between type and texture. So we're going to cover that here so that we finally debunk the myth and are all on the same page. So for hair types, that is how much your hair curls or the shape of your hair. So we have types 1 through 4, and that's straight, wavy, curly, coily. We sometimes identify type 5 because there's also kinky, but the standard Andre Walker system includes the 4 types of hair. So again, straight hair, we all know, just straight, smooth, pretty easy, simple. Wavy, it varies from just loose waves to shorter waves that sometimes have a little bit of a curl. And curls also have a wide range where you can start with loose, bouncy curls and you can get to like tight corkscrews. And we also have the coilies and the kinky hair. So we also have a range there as well, kind of tight coils as well as all the way to kinks that don't necessarily define or clump together naturally. And also we have textures, which really refers to the feel and the diameter of your strands. So we have fine, medium, or coarse. So earlier, if you remember, we talked about how fine strands don't typically have a medulla. This is a big piece in why we have some strands that are medium or coarse, because they have more layers to them. And so for fine hair, it's typically a little bit more fragile. You have to be gentle, but you'll typically have a more sleek look like silk. Whereas medium hair, it'll typically be more voluminous. It can hold products decently, but also won't be weighed down. And it's more like cotton. And lastly, we have coarse hair, which we consider to be like wool. And it'll typically lay in a nice sheet, or your strands are so big and bold that you can see them walking by. So we have those types and we have textures, and they're not to be confused. And that's why each person's hair is as unique as a fingerprint, because you have a combination of types and textures, most of us, and it's unique to each of us. This has been our MYAVANA modules. Thank you all so much for tuning in and learning more about hair biology, the hair shaft, as well as what the hair growth cycles look like. And we're so excited to share more about identifying your unique hair ID based off of your strands, our top hair goals, and our top hair challenges. And this has been our intelligence labs, and we thank you all for tuning in.